So let's talk about bridging the gap. So you have two different products. We have phpBB on the one end and Symfony on the other end. And phpBB wants to use Symfony as the basis for their new version. So that also means that there's two different communities that in some way have to come together, have to interact, have to get used to each other as well, because as I mentioned before, they are quite different. So it will bring some changes to both communities. Some changes might not be as fun as others, but I think there are a lot of advantages to actually have the two communities work together. So I'm going to go through a couple of these advantages with you. First of all is there will be more developers and more skilled developers in your community. Not just your community, also the Symfony community. Because as I mentioned, most people here are developers as well. And once you start working with Symfony, you will maybe also find a way of contributing to the Symfony project instead of just a phpBB project. So both projects have skilled developers in their communities that can now not just focus on contributing to their own community, but also to the other one. So that's a great advantage, especially to me, because as I mentioned, I like communities a lot. Having a bigger community is a good thing, usually. For phpBB, having a strong and tested code base is very important, I think, because it will allow you to focus more on the actual phpBB code. And it will allow you to have to fix less bugs, because there's a lot of code that's in the Symfony core that's been tested, that's been worked with by a lot of people that you don't have to care about. You don't have to maintain that code because it's in the Symfony project, not in your project. You just have to run an update every once in a while to get the new fixes in. Also, there can be more focus on the specific phpBB functionality, where right now you might be fixing bugs also in the database layer or the view layer. There is no need for that anymore. That's all in Symfony. You can focus on actually writing the discussion software. Then from my point of view, I like the fact that phpBB will be a really good use case for Symfony. Because phpBB is so big, so many people are using it, it will be an excellent use case for Symfony to show people, look, you can take this framework, this open source framework, and build another open source project on top of it. And you can work with a lot of people and they will all understand how it works. Which is of course another advantage of having this strong code base that I mentioned before, is that there's a lot more people, because it's an open source framework, there's a lot more people that know how to work with it and will be able to pick up quickly the way you've implemented your code. So yes, as soon as there's something to show to the world about phpBB 4, I will be nagging Niels mainly about having a case study on the Symfony website about this. And this is not just for phpBB, by the way, because I see a lot of open source products, mostly aimed at end users, that are completely written from scratch and are not using a framework. So I'm hoping that this may just show to the world that, look, you can use an open source framework and build, I don't know, Drupal, Joomla on top of it. And that will help a lot of, hopefully help a lot of open source projects to do the same thing. But I don't care if they move to Symfony or to Zen Framework or to Lithium. I would like them to move to Symfony. But that's, it's a good use case, not just for Symfony, but for open source frameworks in general. So so far, it was always, if I had an application based on Symfony, for instance, and I wanted a discussion forum, then I put forum software next to my Symfony installation. Because there was no real way to plug it in, so I had to hack something, for instance, to share the user logins. I had to hack something either in phpBB or in my own code to make sure that it worked together. Having a phpBB 4 based on Symfony, it will be much easier to do this integration because we're all using the same code to make sure that people, for instance, can log in. And also for other types of sharing, making it easier to combine, to fetch the same data from the same database and stuff like that without a lot of hacking. So this will also mean it will be much easier to integrate your mods into the core code. You don't have to hack a lot. I don't know, is it still required to hack the core files for mods? Yeah. Right. So, assuming that that you guys will set up the phpBB 4 code the right way, it will be much easier to actually, without hacking the core code, install mods or plugins or stuff like that using, for instance, the event dispatcher. Maybe Fabian, will you show the event dispatcher? Yes. Using the event dispatcher, it will be much easier to actually have specific actions trigger other actions without having to change the code where the action is called. So the integration will be much easier and much more solid without a lot of hacking. Also because, well, having phpBB aiming at mostly the end user market and Symfony aiming at mostly the developer market, combining the two will allow both communities to explore new markets. From my point of view, and my point of view on phpBB these days is a bit limited, but phpBB forums are mostly used for small community websites and things like that, and not a lot in more corporate environments. Whereas Symfony, because it's mostly aimed at custom development and things like that, is aimed more at small, medium, or even large companies that build their own applications. But what I've seen already, one of the companies I used to work for, they have their whole internal but also customer portal based on Symfony. They will want to have some interaction in that sooner or later, and right now the only real option for that is a very simple forum plugin that's available for Symfony, or you have to write your own custom code. Having something like phpBB built on top of Symfony will allow this company, which has this huge project in Symfony, to just use phpBB. And I'm just guessing that will allow phpBB to come into more of the company corporate environments. On the other hand, for Symfony, it's very interesting to see how the end users will react to Symfony. How easy will it be for them to set up Symfony on their hosting environment? And hopefully that will mean that more people will start thinking about, oh, okay, Symfony, that's really cool. Maybe I'll pick up some PHP and start working with Symfony. So that's two different ways, or a lot of different ways, how we can benefit from the two projects coming together. And now, of course, how can you help out? How can anyone help out? Anyone from the Symfony community, from the phpBB community, how can you help out? Well, first of all, of course, we need to support each other. A lot of the people in the Symfony community have probably never worked with phpBB, or have worked with it in a far, far away past, like me. So they don't know a lot about details of phpBB. On the other hand, of course, a lot of the people in the phpBB community will never have worked with Symfony. So we have to support each other by answering questions, by getting to know each other's products. So that's, I guess, a very obvious one, but also a very important one. This also means that we need to well, the two communities need to get to know each other. So just be friendly to each other. That's the important part, I guess. And make sure that even the stupidest question, you answer it very frankly. Because we have to get to know each other. Also, of course, you can contribute in code. Once you start working with Symfony for phpBB 4, you will have to learn Symfony as well. You'll have to dig into the Symfony code. Yes, that's Ruby code. You have to dig into Symfony. And by digging into Symfony, you might just find this bug in Symfony or something that just doesn't make sense to you. Now, as David's shown before, it's very easy these days, using GitHub, to actually contribute your code. So you just fork the repository, make your changes in your own repository, and just send a pull request. And then hopefully your solution will be good enough to be included, or at least to trigger a fix or a new feature. Also, and that's something that maybe nobody has thought about yet, is that there's a lot of mods out there right now that need to be ported to the new system, or at least a lot of users of these mods will like it to be ported to the new system so they can use it in the new version. So this is also another way of contributing code, not directly into the core of the project, but still to the users and the community in general. And essentially, this is also where the Symfony community can help out, because plugins, or they're called plugins now, they will be called bundles in the next version of Symfony, will allow you to use even more code that's already out there and maintained by someone else in your product. And there's, of course, still a lot of other ways of contributing, like documentation. If you can write documentation for phpBB, of course, but there's also other ways of documenting, like writing a blog post. While you're working on phpBB and you're working with Symfony, you can write a blog post about this great solution that you found to a problem, and someone else may Google the same problem later on, find your blog post, and actually be able to solve their problem very quickly because you were able to document it on your blog. So that's another way of helping out, and there's more ways. I recently wrote a blog post on my own blog. The link will be up there in a minute, about the different ways you can contribute to an open source project in general. So I would suggest to check that out and see how you can contribute to projects. Also things like promotion, of course, promoting your product, or also Symfony, the way you work with Symfony.